Natalie Wood, 1981, USA. On the morning of November 29, 1981, the world woke up to the shocking news that Natalie Wood, one of Hollywood's brightest stars, had been found dead in the waters off Catalina Island. But this wasn't just another tragic celebrity death. It was a mystery that still confounds people to this day. How did Natalie Wood, 43 years old and an accomplished actress, end up dead in the ocean? What really happened that night? It all began the night before, on November 28, 1981, when Wood was aboard the Splendor yacht. She had spent the weekend with her husband, Robert Wagner, and fellow actor Christopher Walken. The trio had set off for a getaway from the public eye, a few days of relaxation to escape their hectic lives. But by the end of the night, something had gone terribly wrong. Around 10 p.m., after a casual evening of drinking and socializing, Natalie retired to her cabin. Wagner and Walken remained on deck, but tensions between the two men were reportedly rising. Wagner later admitted in his memoir that he and Wood had argued earlier that night, though details of the disagreement were murky at best. Walken, a close friend of Wagner's and co-star in the film Brainstorm, was allegedly a source of friction. Wood had been spending time with him, and there were whispers of jealousy. At some point, Wood left her cabin, and within hours, she was gone. The yacht's crew didn't notice anything unusual at first, but by the early morning hours, Wagner noticed that she was missing. A frantic search was launched, but it wasn't until around 8 a.m. that Wood's body was discovered floating in the ocean, about a mile away from the yacht. Her body was recovered by a nearby search party, and while there was no obvious sign of trauma, the details of the scene raised immediate suspicion. Wood was found without her life jacket, something that didn't sit right with those who knew her. A seasoned sailor, Wood was well versed in boat safety. The absence of the life jacket led many to question whether this could have been an accident. Even more disturbing were the bruises on her body. The coroner's report later noted bruises on her arms, face, and neck, which didn't match the description of a typical drowning victim. The investigation now had more questions than answers. What happened in those hours between Wood's disappearance and the discovery of her body? Was it an accident, a drunken fall overboard, or was there something more sinister at play? For years, no one could provide a clear answer. When detectives later re-examined the case, jealousy and betrayal surfaced as a potential motive. Witnesses said they had heard Wagner and Natalie arguing violently, their voices echoing across the still water. Skipper Dennis Davern told investigators he heard her screaming and that Wagner was in a rage. Reports later suggested that Wagner suspected Natalie of being romantically interested in Christopher Walken, sparking a confrontation fueled by alcohol and insecurity. At the same time, rumors swirled that Wagner himself was secretly involved with another Hollywood star, Bond girl Jill St. John, long before Natalie's death. Davern later claimed St. John appeared at Wagner's mansion almost immediately afterward and was constantly around, leading some to believe Wagner may have wanted to end a marriage already strained by infidelity and control. When the case was reopened in 2011, investigators weighed this theory heavily, that Wagner's jealousy, combined with a volatile argument and alcohol, might have pushed the night into deadly territory. Wagner has always denied the allegations, but detectives have never ruled out the possibility that jealousy, or fear of exposure, was the spark that lit the fuse. The initial investigation into Natalie Wood's death quickly ruled her drowning as accidental. But doubts lingered. Wagner, who had been with Wood that night, became the prime suspect, though he was never officially charged. The investigation was complicated by conflicting statements from Wagner and Walken, as both of them gave accounts that didn't quite match up. Wagner claimed to have heard a noise coming from Wood's cabin, but no one was able to corroborate his story. Authorities first attempted to piece together the timeline of events. Wagner told the police that after their argument, Wood had gone to bed and he had gone to sleep shortly afterward. But witnesses testified that they had heard sounds coming from Wood's cabin well after Wagner claimed to have gone to bed. The lack of physical evidence only added to the confusion. No fingerprints, no sign of a struggle, and no definitive witness to the event. The bruises found on Wood's body were puzzling, but could have been caused by the natural effects of being in the water. However, they couldn't rule out the possibility that Wood had been involved in some sort of altercation. The missing life jacket remained a significant red flag, but authorities could not connect the dots. Despite efforts by the Los Angeles Police Department, no one was ever charged in connection with Wood's death, and so the case went cold. The police closed the investigation, and the public moved on, leaving the mystery to linger unanswered. But as years passed, the nagging questions persisted, and new theories began to take shape. For nearly 30 years, the case of Natalie Wood's death was buried in the files of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Despite public interest and constant media coverage, the case remained officially closed. Wood's family, particularly her sister Lana, never gave up on finding answers. Lana Wood, who had been vocal about her doubts concerning the official investigation, pushed for a reopening of the case. She never believed that Natalie's death was a mere accident and spent years fighting for justice. Despite the lack of progress, Lana continued to advocate for the truth, hoping that someday someone would uncover the missing pieces of the puzzle. The media continued to revisit the story periodically, keeping Wood's death in the public eye. In 1997, the case was briefly reopened, but investigators found no new evidence to suggest that anything other than accidental drowning had occurred. At this point, many considered the case closed for good. The story of Natalie Wood, a glamorous Hollywood icon with a tragic end, seemed to be another mystery buried by time. But in 2009, after nearly 3 decades of silence, a breakthrough came. Dennis Davern, the captain of the Splendor yacht, came forward with new information. He publicly admitted that he had lied to investigators in the original case. According to Davern, Wagner and Wood had argued on the night of her death, and Wagner was reportedly drunk and in a violent mood. Davern claimed that Wagner had even prevented him from turning on the searchlights to help locate Wood's body after she had gone overboard. This new testimony, combined with further analysis of the physical evidence, particularly the bruising on Wood's body, led the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to reopen the investigation once again. The case that had been closed for almost 30 years was now officially open again. But the question remained, was it too late to uncover the truth? The reopening of the case in 2011 brought renewed interest, but the truth was still elusive. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department re-examined the evidence and conducted new interviews with witnesses, including the crew of the yacht and people who had been on nearby boats that night. A key moment in the investigation came when it was revealed that Wood had unexplained bruising on her body, and some experts speculated that she may have been assaulted before her death. By 2018, new forensic evidence had come to light that could not be ignored. The bruises on Wood's body, initially believed to be the result of drowning, were now considered to be consistent with someone being thrown out of a boat. These findings led authorities to reevaluate the case once again. Wagner, who had long been considered a possible suspect, was officially named a person of interest in the investigation. Despite the renewed focus, no one was arrested and no charges were filed. Wagner continued to maintain his innocence, but the mounting evidence and Davern's statements raised suspicions that his involvement in Wood's death had been more than just a tragic accident. However, with no hard evidence linking him directly to her death, the investigation stalled once more. In 2020, a medical doctor who had worked with the original coroner, Thomas Noguchi, claimed that Wood's bruises were consistent with someone being thrown overboard. This new perspective on the injuries added another layer of complexity to the case. Yet, despite all the new theories and the renewed interest, the case remains officially unsolved. Many now believe that there is more to Wood's death than the official ruling of an accidental drowning. The evidence points to the possibility of foul play, but without definitive proof, the case continues to haunt those who loved her. The public is left with lingering questions. What really happened on that night aboard the Splendor? Was it an accident, a drunken fall, or was there something far darker at play? As new developments continue to emerge, the search for the truth remains. The story of Natalie Wood is far from over, and perhaps one day, the full truth will be revealed. Until then, her death will remain one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries, one that continues to captivate the public and frustrate those who seek answers. Bob Crane, 1978, USA. Back on June 29, 1978, the news of Bob Crane's murder rocked not just Hollywood but the entire country. The once jovial and beloved star of Hogan's Heroes, known for his effortless charm and humor, was found dead in a Scottsdale, Arizona apartment. What shocked everyone wasn't just the fact that a famous actor had been brutally murdered. It was the brutal way in which he was killed, and the eerie, almost clinical nature of the crime scene. Crane, 49 years old, had spent the day in rehearsals for his stage production of Beginner's Luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater. His body was discovered by his close friend and co-star, Victoria Ann Barry, when she arrived at his apartment to check on him after he had failed to show up for a lunch meeting. She walked in to find Crane's lifeless body, a gruesome sight that would forever haunt her. What made the crime so baffling was the method in which Crane was murdered. His body was bludgeoned beyond recognition, and investigators later discovered that the weapon used was likely a camera tripod, an object that had a chilling significance considering Crane's notorious hobby. Crane was known for his obsession with recording his sexual encounters, and he had often filmed his intimate moments with various women. The murder weapon, something as seemingly ordinary as a camera tripod, now seemed disturbingly symbolic of his secret life. But what truly sent shockwaves through the investigation was the crime scene itself. The police found the apartment in a state that was, for lack of a better term, almost too clean. There was no sign of a struggle, no signs of forced entry, and no stolen valuables. It was as though the killer had been methodical, even calculating in their approach. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. It wasn't the chaotic, bloody scene you might expect in a violent crime. It was almost organized. What added to the mystery was that there were no defensive wounds on Crane's body. He had been bludgeoned while he slept, without any fight, without any warning. Had he been caught off guard by someone he trusted? Was it possible that the killer had been invited into the apartment, someone Crane had known? There was a lack of clues, but there was one key discovery. Crane had kept a detailed, and at times explicit, record of his personal life. Investigators found videotapes in his apartment, tapes documenting his sexual escapades. It became clear that Crane's private life was far more complex and sordid than his public persona. But who was Bob Crane, really? Before the headlines, before the scandal, Bob Crane was one of America's most familiar faces. Born on July 13, 1928, in Waterbury, Connecticut, he had been fascinated by performance since childhood. He started out not on television, but behind a microphone, first as a radio DJ where his quick wit, sharp timing, and magnetic personality made him a star of local airwaves. His success on radio earned him a move to Los Angeles, where he hosted one of the city's most popular morning shows. Listeners loved him for his humor and spontaneity, traits that would soon make him a television favorite. Crane's charisma caught the attention of TV producers, and before long, he transitioned into acting. Guest appearances on popular shows soon led to the role that would define his career, Colonel Hogan on Hogan's Heroes. The sitcom, set in a German POW camp during World War II, was a strange mix of comedy and wartime tension, but it worked. Audiences loved the show's clever premise, and Crane's smooth, mischievous charm made him the heart of it. Hogan's Heroes premiered in 1965 and quickly became a phenomenon. For 6 seasons, Bob Crane became a symbol of American wit and resilience, his character using brains over brawn to outsmart the enemy. His performance earned him critical praise and solidified him as a household name. To the public, he was the perfect blend of humor, confidence, and warmth. The guy everyone wanted to have a drink with. But away from the cameras, Crane's life was much more complicated. He was married twice, first to Ann Terzian, with whom he had 3 children, and later to his Hogan's Heroes co-star Patricia Olson, known professionally as Sigrid Valdis. Though his career was soaring, his personal life was filled with turbulence. He struggled to balance his fame with his family life and began developing an obsession with photography. What started as an innocent hobby soon became something darker. Crane began recording his sexual encounters, sometimes consensually, sometimes under murkier circumstances, using the same video equipment he so proudly showed off to friends. He was known to carry cameras everywhere, and often invited women back to his apartment or hotel rooms to film intimate moments. Those who knew him described him as charming, yet reckless, unable to separate his public image from his private indulgences. The investigation into Bob Crane's murder began immediately after his body was discovered. With no obvious signs of forced entry, and nothing taken from the apartment, investigators began to focus on those closest to him. Sergio. First person of interest was John Henry Carpenter, a man with whom Crane had developed a close friendship over the years. Carpenter, a regional sales manager for Sony Electronics, had been introduced to Crane by his co-star Richard Dawson. The two men quickly bonded over their mutual love for video equipment, and their relationship evolved into one where they filmed their intimate moments with various women, including Crane's sexual exploits. Carpenter was staying with Crane at the time of the murder and had spent time with him in the days leading up to the death. However, it was reported that Crane had recently grown tired of Carpenter, describing him as a hanger-on and a nuisance. In fact, according to Crane's son, Scotty, Crane had called Carpenter the night before the murder to sever their friendship. This call, meant to end the relationship, would prove to be a pivotal moment. Carpenter became a primary suspect, and when his rental car was impounded, investigators found bloodstains in the car. These stains matched Crane's blood type. However, at the time, DNA testing was not available, and the evidence, though compelling, was circumstantial. Carpenter, who had been known to spend time with Crane on his travels, could not be definitively linked to the crime scene. There was no murder weapon, no direct evidence that pointed to Carpenter beyond the bloodstains. And with no physical evidence to place him at the scene of the crime, the case quickly hit a dead end. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Carpenter was arrested in 1992. A photograph from the crime scene seemed to show brain tissue in Crane's rental car, and investigators thought it was enough to make a case. But Carpenter's defense team countered the prosecution's claims, highlighting gaps in the investigation, the mishandling of evidence, and the lack of a definitive weapon. Carpenter maintained his innocence throughout the trial, and in 1994, after a lengthy trial, he was acquitted of Crane's murder. The case against him had been too weak, and without a clear weapon or physical evidence linking him to the crime, he was allowed to walk free. Bob Crane's murder case went cold almost as soon as Carpenter was acquitted. The once highly publicized investigation seemed to lose its steam. The media, which had initially been captivated by the sensational details of Crane's secret life, began to move on. Without hard evidence or a solid lead, the investigation stalled. Years passed, and Crane's murder became an afterthought, overshadowed by other Hollywood scandals. Crane's children, particularly his son Scotty, continued to press for answers. But with no new developments, it seemed that the case would never be solved. For the family, the agony of uncertainty was unbearable. They were left with nothing but questions, and the haunting memory of a man they loved, taken from them in such a violent and disturbing way. Despite the case going cold, there were still those who believed that the truth could be uncovered. Journalists, private investigators, and Crane's family continued to ask questions, revisit old evidence, and search for new clues. Yet, as the years turned into decades, the case seemed destined to remain a mystery. In 2006, the case was briefly revisited when a Phoenix reporter submitted blood samples from Carpenter's rental car for DNA testing. The results were inconclusive, but the renewed attention on the case sparked a fresh wave of interest. Despite years of frustration and false hopes, the case was reopened in 1990. New forensic techniques, including DNA testing, provided a glimmer of hope. Scottsdale police investigator Barry Vassell and Jim Raines from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office re-examined the evidence, and in 1992, they were able to make an arrest. John Henry Carpenter was charged with Crane's murder. However, the 1994 trial became a spectacle of conflicting testimony. Crane's son Scotty testified about the deteriorating relationship between his father and Carpenter. He confirmed that Crane had called Carpenter the night before his murder to end their friendship, but Carpenter's defense team tore apart the prosecution's case. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the investigation had been mishandled. In the end, Carpenter was acquitted, and the case remained unsolved. Despite his acquittal, many, including members of the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office, believe that Carpenter was the murderer. The case is still officially open, but it seems unlikely that it will ever be solved. As of 2016, efforts to test more DNA from the original crime scene have failed. To this day, the murder of Bob Crane remains one of the most haunting and unresolved crimes in Hollywood history. Despite advancements in forensic science and efforts to reopen the case, the truth remains elusive. For Crane's family, particularly his son, the search for justice continues. Crane's murder is a chilling reminder that sometimes even the most public lives are fraught with hidden dangers, and in the case of Bob Crane, the true story may never be told. Thelma Todd, 1935, USA. The year was 1935, and Thelma Todd, just 29 years old, was on the brink of achieving more. More fame, more acclaim, more success. She wasn't just another pretty face in Hollywood. She was known for her comedic timing, charm, and striking beauty, often cast as the wisecracking blonde in films alongside the likes of the Marx Brothers. She had the world at her feet, a starlet on the rise, ready to leave an indelible mark on the industry. But one fateful night in December, her life came to a sudden, tragic end. On December 16, 1935, Thelma's body was found in chilling circumstances, slumped over in the front seat of her Lincoln convertible, parked in the garage of her former lover's property in Pacific Palisades, California. The car was enclosed in a locked garage, and her lifeless body was discovered by her maid. To the public, it was shocking. A glamorous young actress, beautiful, successful, and seemingly full of life, suddenly gone. The autopsy ruled her death as carbon monoxide poisoning. Officially, it was listed as accidental, but the details were far from simple. She had attended a Hollywood party just 2 nights before, laughing, dancing, and planning her next week's events. She'd been dropped off at her apartment around 4 a.m. by her chauffeur, only to find the door locked. Clad in a thin evening gown and mink coat, she may have climbed the 270 steps to the garage above her cafe, perhaps seeking warmth in her car that cold night. Investigators claimed she must have started the engine, fallen asleep, and succumbed to the fumes. But not everyone believed that story. Her family, friends, and even the press immediately sensed something wasn't right. The car's engine was off when she was found, yet there was still fuel in the tank. The position of her body, the absence of soot in her lungs, and the bruising around her mouth and throat hinted at something more violent. It looked too neat, too conveniently tragic. Hollywood officials rushed to label it an accident, not wanting another scandal to stain its already tarnished reputation. But the public wasn't convinced. But before she became a mystery, Thelma Todd was one of Hollywood's brightest stars, a Massachusetts girl who conquered Hollywood with a mixture of brains, ambition, and charm. Born in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1906, Thelma was the daughter of a local city alderman. Her early life was ordinary, but full of potential. Teachers described her as bright and determined. She attended Lowell State Normal School, training to become a teacher. But even as she stood before a classroom, she dreamed of something bigger: fame, lights, and the silver screen. Her break came when she entered beauty pageants and was crowned Miss Massachusetts in 1925. Hollywood talent scouts took notice and invited her to study at the Paramount School for Junior Stars, where her elegance and natural comedic ability stood out. Soon, she signed a contract with legendary producer Hal Roach, starring alongside comedy legends like Buster Keaton, Laurel and Hardy, and the Marx Brothers. Audiences adored her. She wasn't the typical damsel. She was witty, independent, and self-assured. Her performances in films like Monkey Business, 1931, and Horse Feathers, 1932, made her a comedic favorite, and by the mid-1930s, she had become a fixture in Hollywood's golden age. But Thelma was also practical. She knew that fame was fleeting. So, at the height of her career, she began planning for her future beyond acting. In 1934, she opened Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, a glamorous seaside restaurant and nightclub along the Pacific Coast Highway. It quickly became one of Los Angeles' hottest spots, visited by stars, socialites, and power brokers. To Thelma, the cafe was her retirement plan. To others, it was a goldmine of opportunity and danger. Because as her business grew, so did the shadows around her. When Thelma refused to allow illegal gambling at her cafe, she made enemies. Gangsters, reportedly connected to Charles Lucky Luciano, pressured her to open her upstairs floor for casino operations. Thelma stood her ground. She wanted her club to be legitimate, a place for laughter and elegance, not mob deals and money laundering. But in Hollywood's underbelly, defiance came with consequences. Her business partner and sometime lover, Roland West, a film director known for his temper, shared an apartment next to hers above the cafe. Their relationship had grown tense. West's career had cooled, and some said he resented Thelma's growing independence. He allegedly locked her out of their shared living space on the night she died, an action that many later found deeply suspicious. Then there was her ex-husband, Pat DiCicco, a small-time producer and known associate of mobsters like Luciano. Their marriage had been violent, marked by drunken fights and abuse. DiCicco was at the same Hollywood party Thelma attended the night before her death. Witnesses recalled an argument between the two. Hours later, she was dead. And yet, the web didn't stop there. Thelma's brief affair with Lucky Luciano himself added another layer of danger. He was said to have beaten her, supplied her with drugs to maintain her figure, and demanded control of her cafe for gambling purposes. When she refused, he reportedly threatened her life. The week before her death, Thelma received multiple letters warning that she would be silenced if she didn't cooperate. It was becoming clear. Thelma Todd had more than one enemy. At first, authorities dismissed the case as a tragic accident. The cause: accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. The explanation: she'd simply fallen asleep in her car while trying to stay warm. But too many inconsistencies refused to go away. Thelma's friends swore she had been in high spirits before her death. She was planning Christmas trips and new film projects. Her mother insisted she wasn't suicidal. Witnesses reported seeing Thelma alive on Sunday, nearly a full day after her supposed time of death. One even claimed to have spotted her in her car, with a man. Autopsy results complicated things further. Thelma had bruising around her throat, consistent with force, and injuries suggesting something had been inserted into her mouth. Details eerily similar to a story in which Luciano allegedly forced a champagne bottle into her mouth during a past altercation. Then came the most haunting detail. When the garage was opened, the car's engine wasn't running. How could she have died from carbon monoxide poisoning if the car wasn't on? Investigators circled back to Roland West. He admitted to locking the doors of their shared apartment that night. He claimed it was to teach her a lesson for coming home late from the party. When questioned about hearing her return, he said he'd slept through it. Years later, as he lay dying, he reportedly whispered a partial confession, admitting he had something to do with Thelma's death, though no official record of that statement was ever confirmed. DiCicco, too, faced scrutiny. His violent temper and connections to organized crime made him a convenient suspect, and Luciano's presence in Los Angeles during that same weekend only deepened suspicions of mob involvement. The deeper police dug, the murkier it got. Some evidence pointed toward murder, others toward a tragic accident. But with Hollywood pressure mounting and reputations on the line, the case was quietly closed. A grand jury was convened in early 1936 to review the case. After weeks of testimony, they split evenly. Half believed she had died accidentally, the other half insisted it was homicide. With no definitive proof, the case was officially ruled death by accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. Her mother, Alice Todd, remained firm that her daughter's death was an accident, but those who knew Thelma best never believed it. In the years that followed, everyone tied to her death seemed to fade into obscurity. Roland West continued managing the cafe but never regained his career. Pat DiCicco remarried. His next wife was socialite Gloria Vanderbilt, and even that marriage ended in scandal and abuse. Luciano returned to New York. his Hollywood operations quietly buried. As for Thelma, her ashes were returned to Massachusetts and buried beside her mother. Her cafe, once a beacon of Hollywood glamour, eventually lost its shine and was renamed several times before closing for good. Thelma Todd's life was a mirror of old Hollywood, beautiful, glittering, and fragile. Beneath the laughter of her comedies and the sparkle of her career lay a woman constantly battling for control of her image, her business, and her safety. To this day, her death remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Was it a tragic accident caused by exhaustion and cold? A violent confrontation that went too far? Or a calculated hit orchestrated by powerful men who feared what she knew? We may never know the full truth. What remains certain is that Thelma Todd was more than a footnote in Hollywood history. She was a pioneer, an actress turned businesswoman, a woman who stood her ground in an era dominated by men, and perhaps a victim of that very defiance. Her story is a chilling reminder that fame in Hollywood has always come at a cost, and sometimes that cost is one's life. Jill Dando, 1999, UK. It was a spring morning in London on April 26, 1999. Peaceful, calm, just like any other. But everything changed in a flash. Jill Dando, the beloved TV presenter and household name, was gunned down outside her home on Gowan Avenue, Fulham. A single shot, fired at close range, took her life in an instant. Jill had just returned to her house after visiting her fiancé, Alan Farthing, at his home in Chiswick. She'd been living in the process of selling her property, and the purpose of her visit was to collect a few contract documents. There was nothing suspicious about the errand, nothing out of the ordinary, until she stepped out of her car. It was 11:32 a.m. when she parked her car, walked towards her front door, and fumbled with her keys. In the blink of an eye, a man appeared from behind, grabbed her, forced her to the ground, and shot her once in the head. The bullet entered just above her left temple, exiting the right side of her skull. Neighbors heard a scream, but no gunshot. No one suspected what was happening just feet away. Richard Hughes, one of Jill's neighbors, looked out his window and saw a man walking away from her house. The description he gave police, tall, about 40 years old, would later be one of the few clues that would surface, but the rest was eerily silent. By 11:47 a.m., police were called to the scene. Jill's body was discovered by Helen Doble, another neighbor, 14 minutes after the murder. The police arrived soon after, and the crime scene was quickly secured. What they found was chilling. No sign of a struggle. Nothing was stolen. Her house was locked up tight. No forced entry. It wasn't a random act of violence. Jill's home was a sanctuary. Why target her? But it wasn't the crime that stumped the investigation. It was the method. The murder weapon. A 9mm semi-automatic pistol. But there were no signs of a struggle. No signs of a fight. The killer hadn't rushed, nor was there any panic. They had been in complete control, executing Jill with precision. And the most chilling part, it wasn't a gunshot in the traditional sense. This was a hard contact execution, meaning the barrel of the gun had been pressed to her head to muffle the shot. Born Jill Wendy Dando in London on November 9, 1961, Jill had always been destined for the spotlight. A natural broadcaster, Jill entered the public eye in the 1980s as a reporter for BBC. Her charm, warmth, and relatability made her an instant favorite. As a BBC presenter, she became a household name, most notably for her role as the host of the hit show Crime Watch UK, where she brought unsolved criminal cases to the public. Her calm, reassuring presence made her the face of crime reporting. Jill became so much more than a journalist. She was an emblem of trust and integrity. She was loved by millions, making her sudden death all the more incomprehensible. Jill was engaged to Alan Farthing, a gynecologist who was later appointed as the Queen's personal physician. Their relationship seemed full of promise, with plans for a wedding in the fall of 1999. They were the picture of happiness, and Jill's murder seemed to rob the world of not only a talented presenter, but a woman full of potential and love. Her life seemed so full of promise, so bright, so positive. But someone wanted to destroy that promise. The murder investigation into Jill Dando's death was called Operation Oxborough. It was a massive effort by the Metropolitan Police, drawing national attention and a media frenzy. But, despite the public interest, the investigation would soon hit dead ends, and the authorities were left scrambling for answers. At first, the police looked into theories involving obsessed fans or random, crazed individuals. But as they began to piece the evidence together, a more chilling theory began to emerge. Could Jill have been targeted by a professional hitman? After all, the crime had been precise, methodical, and planned. The execution had none of the typical disorganization of a random killing. Was this a case of a political assassination, or perhaps a personal vendetta? The first major lead pointed to Barry George, a man who lived only 500 yards from Jill's house. George had a history of stalking women and had been previously arrested for other antisocial behavior. When his home was searched, police found over 4,000 photographs of women, many taken surreptitiously in public places. Among those photos were several of prominent women, TV personalities, including Jill Dando. But it wasn't just the photos that raised alarm. Authorities discovered a military gas mask and a modified Bruni blank firing pistol in George's apartment, exactly the same type of weapon used in Jill's murder. Additionally, firearm discharge residue was found on his jacket from the day of the shooting. Despite these discoveries, George was arrested but never definitively linked to Jill's murder. It seemed the circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. He was convicted in 2001, but the conviction was met with public criticism. There was no clear motive, and the evidence seemed too thin to warrant a solid conviction. His defense team tore apart the prosecution's case, and in 2007, after failed appeals, George's conviction was overturned. The case had ground to a halt, but new leads were emerging. In the years following the conviction, new evidence began to surface, leading some to believe that the true killer had never been caught. A former van driver came forward, revealing a startling possibility. He claimed that on the day of Jill's murder, he had seen a man running away from the scene, a man who closely resembled notorious Serbian hitman Milorad Ulemek. Ulemek, also known as Legija, was a commander under the tyrannical regime of Slobodan Milosevic, responsible for overseeing a squad of assassins. He had been involved in numerous politically motivated killings during the Yugoslav wars, including the assassination of Serbian journalists and other political figures. In 1999, when Jill was killed, Ulemek was likely to have been in London. After NATO bombings targeted Serbia, Ulemek's team had reportedly been active in retaliation. In fact, just hours after Jill's death, the BBC received a call from an individual claiming that Jill's murder was in direct response to the NATO bombings. Could Ulemek have been the one to pull the trigger? The van driver, who was in his 60s at the time, told investigators that he had 80% confidence that the man he saw running across Fulham Palace Road was Ulemek. His description matched that of a man seen sprinting away from the scene by another witness, a woman who had seen him in a dark suit, appearing startled and out of place. Experts also compared CCTV footage from a nearby station to Ulemek's known images, and facial recognition specialist Emi Polito confirmed a striking resemblance between the man on the video and Ulemek. But despite the strong lead, the investigation stalled once again. Ulemek, now serving a 40-year sentence in Serbia, had been linked to dozens of other assassinations, but was never formally connected to Jill's murder. So why was Jill Dando killed? Was it an act of revenge, or was it linked to the ongoing war in the Balkans? Did Ulemek kill her to make a political statement, or silence her as a voice of resistance? The renewed investigation in the 2010s only deepened the mystery. Forensic tests and psychological profiles suggested the crime may have been committed by a professional hitman, an assassin with military precision and knowledge. The theory about Ulemek as the perpetrator began to gain traction, but the evidence was still circumstantial, and no one was ever officially charged. Jill Dando's legacy continues to live on in the hearts of her fans, and the search for her killer remains one of Britain's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. Before moving on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference, and we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Richie Edwards, 1995, UK. It was a cold, bitter morning on February 1st, 1995, when Richie Edwards, the enigmatic and tortured guitarist and lyricist for the Manic Street Preachers, vanished without a trace. He was set to fly to the United States with his bandmates, but that morning he checked out of his hotel in London, leaving behind his suitcase, toiletries, and a critical medication. By noon, Richie was gone, and the questions began to pile up. His car, a Subaru Impreza, was found parked near the Severn Bridge, an area notorious for suicides. But there was no sign of Richie. No body, no clues, nothing. The initial investigation was baffled by the mystery of his disappearance. Was this a planned escape? Had he taken his own life? Or was there something more sinister at play? Days passed, and there was no word from Richie. The police quickly focused their efforts on the Severn Bridge, the location where his car was found. But there was no evidence to suggest that Richie had jumped. The car had no signs of a struggle or forceful entry, and there was no note, no indication that he planned to take his life. The missing person case soon became a high-profile investigation, with journalists and fans alike speculating about what might have happened to the charismatic and troubled figure. Was it a suicide? Had he run away from his bandmates, his family, and his responsibilities? Or was this the work of someone or something else? As the weeks and months passed, rumors about Richie's mental state began to surface. Known for his severe depression, self-harm, and intense battles with alcohol and anorexia, Richie had been open about his struggles. In 1991, during a live performance, Richie had famously carved the words "for real" into his own arm with a razor blade, a shocking act that required 18 stitches and highlighted the depths of his inner turmoil. He had always been candid about the pain he felt, but could his battles have led him to an unthinkable choice? But there were discrepancies that didn't add up. Richie had withdrawn $2,800 from his bank account before his disappearance. The idea of someone planning suicide while withdrawing large sums of cash seemed off. Was there more to the story than a man unable to cope with his inner demons? Richie's family and bandmates, especially his best friend and bandmate, Nicky Wire, were left to wonder, was Richie hiding somewhere, or had something much darker occurred? Then came the taxi driver who claimed to have seen Richie in the valleys of South Wales, a few days after he was last seen. The driver said that Richie was acting strangely, talking in a Cockney accent and asking to be taken to various locations, including Pontypool, a place where Richie had no real reason to go. Theories about Richie's disappearance began to grow, with some believing that he had run away, while others speculated that he had been in the process of escaping his tumultuous life. But the most chilling piece of the puzzle came when investigators discovered that Richie's car had been left in an abandoned service station near the Severn Bridge. The vehicle showed signs of being lived in, but there was no sign of Richie. Had he been planning to disappear? Or was he hiding, escaping his personal demons in a bid for a fresh start? The timeline of Richie's final days had more than a few holes. He had checked out of his hotel at 7 a.m. on the morning of his disappearance. But by all accounts, he had not planned to be anywhere specific. He was supposed to have been flying to the U.S. with his bandmates. His sudden disappearance was a mystery, unlike any other. Richie Edwards, born on December 22, 1967, in Nos, Blackwood, Wales, was far from just a typical rock star. His band, the Manic Street Preachers, was known for its fiercely political lyrics, its energetic music, and its focus on the harsh realities of life. But Richie himself was something more, a symbol of internal struggle, an embodiment of raw emotion. From an early age, Richie's life seemed destined for greatness. He attended Oakdale Comprehensive School, where he met his future bandmates, Nicky Wire, Sean Moore, and James Dean Bradfield. The group became inseparable, forming the foundation for what would become one of the most influential alternative rock bands of the 1990s. Their music was as much about their philosophy as it was about their sound. Richie's lyrics were deeply introspective, often touching on themes of social inequality, personal despair, and political rebellion. By 1989, Richie had firmly become the band's lyricist and one of its driving forces, contributing the bulk of the band's words while leaving the music largely to the others. His lyrics were raw, poetic, and often disturbing, but they spoke to a generation that was lost, confused, and angry. Despite the success, Richie's personal struggles were well documented. Severe depression, alcoholism, and anorexia plagued him throughout his life, and his self-destructive behaviors became a prominent part of his identity. The band's third album, The Holy Bible, was a raw reflection of his inner turmoil, with many of the tracks penned by Richie himself. His struggles with mental health became intertwined with the band's identity, making his disappearance all the more mysterious. Richie was known to self-harm, and it wasn't just the public acts of cutting or carving words into his skin. He was also known for substance abuse and for staying in psychiatric hospitals, where he would try to escape the psychological demons that tortured him. Yet, through all of this, he still managed to find moments of brilliance in his art, and his bandmates, especially Nicky Wire, considered him to be the heart and soul of the Manic Street Preachers. According to Emma Forrest, as quoted in A Version of Reason, the night before he disappeared, Edwards gave a friend a book called Novel with Cocaine, instructing her to read the introduction, which details the author staying in a mental asylum before vanishing. While staying at the Embassy Hotel in Bayswater Road, London, according to Rob Jovanovich's biography, Edwards removed some books and videos from his bag. Among them was a copy of the play Equus. Edwards placed them in a box with a note that said, "I love you," wrapped the box like a birthday present, and decorated it with collages and literary quotations, including a picture of a Germanic-looking house and Bugs Bunny. The package was addressed to Edwards' on-off girlfriend Jo, whom he met some years prior, although they had split a few weeks earlier. As soon as Richie Edwards disappeared, the band and his loved ones were thrown into turmoil. His absence was a mystery. The hotel checkout, the withdrawals, the cryptic final gift, none of these details seemed to match the narrative of someone planning to end their life. In the days following his disappearance, the police were called, but the investigation hit a dead end. His Subaru was found near the Severn Bridge, but there was no body, no signs of foul play. The police were left with nothing but a toll receipt, a couple of vague sightings, and an increasing sense that something wasn't right. A taxi driver claimed to have picked up a man who resembled Richie Edwards, and took him to several locations, including his hometown of Blackwood, but the story remained unclear. Was this Richie, or just another man? Was it a coincidence? No one knew for sure, and the timeline of events became even more muddled. The breakthrough came in 2018, when new evidence was uncovered that changed everything. The toll receipt, originally believed to indicate Richie's final moments, had been misinterpreted. The software engineer who had worked on the bridge system revealed that the receipt timestamp was actually in 24-hour format, not AM/PM. This small change in the timeline raised huge questions and pointed to the possibility that Richie had crossed the bridge early in the morning, not in the afternoon as originally thought. But with no body and no further solid evidence, the case remained unresolved. Was Richie Edwards hiding, as his bandmate Nicky Wire suggested, or did he fall victim to an unspoken tragedy? The public fascination with the case continued, and speculation grew as the years went by. In 2008, Richie Edwards was officially declared dead in absentia. But the mysteries surrounding his disappearance have never been fully solved. Was it suicide? Did he deliberately vanish, unable to cope with his personal battles? Or did he meet a tragic fate that we'll never know? There have been numerous sightings over the years, in Goa, India, and the Canary Islands, but none have been confirmed. Even now, Richie Edwards remains one of the most compelling figures in rock history, a man whose legacy lives on through his powerful lyrics and the unanswered questions surrounding his disappearance. Tom Thompson, 1917, Canada. At just 39 years old, Tom Thomson was on the cusp of a groundbreaking career in the Canadian art world. His paintings of the wild, rugged beauty of Algonquin Park had already earned him a legacy that would stand the test of time. His use of vivid colors and emotive landscapes made him the artist of Canada's wilderness. But just before he was about to reach the pinnacle of his fame, Tom's life was tragically cut short in the most mysterious way. On July 8, 1917, Thomson went out for what should have been a routine fishing trip. He was never seen again. His canoe was found abandoned hours later, floating in the lake, with no sign of him in sight. But what really happened to Tom Thomson? And why, more than 100 years later, is his death still shrouded in mystery? The last traces of Tom Thomson's life were left in the waters of Algonquin Park. He was last seen leaving a lodge at around noon, telling his companion, Shannon Fraser, that he was going out for a day of fishing. But when Thomson failed to return, and his canoe was found flipped over, the questions started to pile up. At the time, no one could understand what had happened. Thomson had been on the verge of what many saw as his greatest achievement. He was a man full of potential, whose unique connection with nature resonated deeply in his paintings. He wasn't just any artist. He was Canada's artist, with the ability to capture the essence of the land in ways no one else had. And yet, his life ended under circumstances that still don't add up. The scene of Thomson's death is still one of the most puzzling and disputed events in Canadian history. On July 16, 1917, 8 days after his disappearance, Thomson's body was found in the waters of Canoe Lake, an area he knew intimately. When his body surfaced, it was already in an advanced state of decomposition, raising even more questions. The official cause of death was drowning, but there was more to it than just that. Thomson's body showed signs of a head injury, including a bruise on his right temple, which seemed too violent for a simple drowning accident. Could it have been an accidental fall? Or did someone take his life? Theories began to swirl. A fishing line was wrapped around his ankle, which seemed odd, especially in an area known for its gentle currents. The presence of the bruise on his head made it seem like he could have hit something in the water, but who would leave him to drown if he were unconscious? As the body was examined, the lack of forensic technology back then left investigators with far more questions than answers. No one could definitively explain the strange events leading to Thomson's death. There were too many conflicting reports about his disappearance and the state of his canoe. It seemed clear. This wasn't a simple accident. As years passed, the case grew colder. Tom Thomson's death was a tragedy, but one that remained mysterious. The debate about whether it was an accident or something darker persisted, with no clear answers to settle the matter. His family and friends, along with the public, yearned for closure, but the case seemed destined to remain unsolved. In the 1970s and 1980s, the mystery of Thomson's death was discussed with increasing frequency, with some suggesting that someone might have been involved. Theories about murder gained traction when it became known that Thomson had disagreements with certain individuals, especially those in the area where he was last seen. Some even speculated that local animosities could have played a role in his disappearance. Yet despite the theories, there was no breakthrough, no physical evidence, no clear motive, and no confession. The case seemed to have stagnated. The media's interest faded, and the case sat quietly in the archives of Canadian crime history. Then, in the late 20th century, new attention was brought to the case. Advances in forensic science, including psychological profiling and more advanced research techniques, helped piece together some of the missing parts of the puzzle. However, the official cause of death remained the same: accidental drowning. But the case wasn't closed. Theories continued to surface, and one persistent idea has been that Thomson may have been murdered, a victim of a tragic act of violence. Some people still insist that he could have been assaulted before falling into the water. Others pointed to a possible altercation before his trip, suggesting that someone in the area might have wanted him gone. More recent investigations into the case have looked at the psychological profile of the people around him, trying to uncover new clues. But the answers remain elusive. His death continues to haunt the Canadian art world, and despite everything that has been speculated, the truth of what happened to Tom Thomson may never be fully known. Today, Tom Thomson's art continues to be revered, his legacy ever present in Canada's cultural fabric. But the mystery surrounding his death still lingers. It's a story of loss, of a young life that should have been filled with more art, but was tragically cut short in the most mysterious way. The real story of his final moments may never be uncovered, but the questions will remain. Juanita Nielsen, 1975, Australia. At 37 years old, Juanita Nielsen, a passionate activist and heiress, was at the height of her career, fighting for the rights of the people against powerful property developers. But on July 4, 1975, her life was tragically cut short in a way no one could have predicted. She went missing after a meeting at the Carousel Club in King's Cross, a place known for its underworld connections and shady dealings. She vanished without a trace, and despite years of investigations, the questions surrounding her disappearance have never been fully answered. So, what happened to Juanita? Was it a political hit, or was her disappearance something darker, a consequence of her activism against the city's most powerful figures? To be clear, Juanita Nielsen was not just a socialite. She was a force in Sydney's political activism, someone who wasn't afraid to speak out and take a stand against the greed and corruption of the property development industry. Born into wealth, she was the heir to the Mark Foy's retail fortune, but Juanita was determined to carve her own path. As a journalist and the owner of Now magazine, she wasn't interested in the luxury of her inheritance. Instead, she focused on issues that were important to the heart of Sydney's community, specifically the threat posed by large developers who had their eyes set on demolishing entire neighborhoods in the name of progress. Her public persona was that of an outspoken, courageous woman willing to stand up against the machine. Her activism made her a familiar face, especially in areas like King's Cross, where her opposition to developers and her campaigns to protect heritage buildings made her both admired and controversial. But it was that very activism that also made her a target, someone whose voice was becoming too powerful for certain people to ignore. She had rallied the community, campaigned against corrupt practices, and disrupted major development projects in King's Cross that were backed by powerful figures in Sydney's business and political elite. But just as she was gaining ground, Juanita disappeared, leaving a vacuum of unanswered questions. In the morning of July 4, 1975, Juanita was seen walking to the Carousel Club in King's Cross for a meeting with a man named Eddie Trigg, who worked for the club. They had arranged to discuss advertising for her magazine, Now. She was scheduled to meet David Farrell, her business partner, later that day. But she never showed up. Hours later, when she failed to call or show up for her meeting, David became concerned and reported her missing. The last known sighting was in the early afternoon, and from there, the trail went cold. Juanita's car was found untouched, and her personal belongings, including her purse, were still with her. The fact that she had disappeared so quickly, without leaving behind any traces, made it even more chilling. Where had she gone? Why had she left so abruptly? Was there something in that meeting that made her disappear? As the days went by, the mystery deepened. Witnesses came forward with conflicting accounts. One man reported seeing Juanita get into a yellow car with two men just outside the Carousel Club, but no one could say who those men were. The police investigated, but it was as if Juanita had simply vanished into thin air. There were whispers about the underworld connections that surrounded the Carousel Club and its owner, Jim Anderson, a man deeply linked to Abe Saffron, Sydney's most notorious crime figure. Investigators initially treated Juanita's disappearance as a case of a missing person. But as the days passed, the more they realized that there was something far more sinister at play. As they dug into her life and connections, they found a web of deceit involving property developers, criminal syndicates, and people who had a lot to lose if Juanita's anti-development stance gained momentum. The first major breakthrough came when they traced a meeting she had with Eddie Trigg and Shane Martin Simmons just before her disappearance. The pair worked for the Carousel Club and were reportedly trying to get Juanita to attend a press night, which she had refused. A few days later, on June 30th, They showed up at her door, pretending they were there to discuss advertising. Juanita grew suspicious and refused to meet with them. But what did they want with her? And why was she so worried? Theories began to emerge. Some believed Juanita had uncovered something deeper, something more dangerous, and that she had become a target for silencing. Her activism and her investigation into corruption were seen as threats by the powerful figures involved in the real estate deals she had been protesting. Could this have been the reason for her disappearance? As the years passed, the investigation hit a wall. The police failed to make any significant progress, and the case began to cool down. For years there were no answers, and the family and friends of Juanita were left wondering if they would ever find out the truth. Her activism had left a significant impact on Sydney's political landscape, and her disappearance became a symbol of the dangerous consequences of speaking out. But the mystery surrounding her case never went away. Whispers about crime syndicates, corruption, and the involvement of powerful people continued to circle, but no concrete answers ever emerged. Juanita's family continued to search for answers. Her friends and supporters never forgot her, but the case remained frustratingly unsolved. As the years turned into decades, the world moved on. The fury of the people who had once supported Juanita's fight seemed to fade, but for those closest to her, the questions remained. The investigation into Juanita Nielsen's disappearance was never truly closed. In fact, it was reopened multiple times over the years, fueled by new evidence, witness testimonies, and advancements in technology. The case gained renewed interest in the 1990s, when an official federal parliamentary committee reopened the case and linked Juanita's disappearance to the King's Cross criminal underworld. The committee pointed out that police failings in the protection of certain suspects hindered the investigation. Theories began to gain more ground, with some even suggesting that Juanita's disappearance was tied to a bigger conspiracy involving developers and criminal organizations. In 2004, a breakthrough came when Loretta Crawford, the Carousel Club receptionist, retracted her earlier testimony and came forward with a new claim. She had seen Juanita's body in the club's basement, with a single gunshot wound to the head. Crawford stated that she had seen Eddie Trigg and Shane Martin Simmons standing over her. Despite these new revelations, Juanita's disappearance remains officially unsolved. The theories continue to evolve, and hope for resolution still lingers, but the truth may never fully come to light. Juanita Nielsen's case is not just a mystery. It's a warning of the price one pays for standing up to the powers that be. Her disappearance may never be fully explained, but it remains one of the most haunting stories in Sydney's history. The fight for justice continues, but the legacy of Juanita Nielsen's disappearance will forever be a symbol of the power of activism and the danger that comes with it. As we wrap up today's deep dive into one of the most haunting celebrity mysteries, we're left with more questions than answers, just like the countless cold cases that continue to haunt us. While we may never know the full truth behind these untimely deaths, the stories behind them serve as a chilling reminder of the dark side of fame and the mysteries that remain unsolved. If you enjoyed this investigation and want to stay on top of all the latest true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and Hollywood secrets, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video. And of course, drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below. What do you think happened in this case? Let's discuss it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, where we'll uncover more mysteries that the world still can't explain.